My name is Greg Nilgis, and this video is in support of Sonoran Desert Institute's FTH 223 hammer-fired pistol course. Today's date is the 11th of July, 2024. There's no live ammunition in the workspace, and I do not have a functional firearm in the workspace. My name is Greg Nilgis, and this video is in support of Sonoran Desert Institute's FTH 223 hammer-fired pistol course. Today's date is the 11th of July, 2024. There's no live ammunition in the workspace, and I do not have a functional firearm in the workspace. In part one of the video, we're asked to locate a firearm that we're not very familiar with and do some analysis of potential failures and what may cause them. And the firearm I chose is the Kel-Tec PF9. It's a firearm I own, and I've owned it for 10 or 15 years, but I haven't shot it much in the last 8-10 years anyway, and I really have no knowledge of the internal workings of it. I'm not even sure how many times I've even field stripped the thing, to be honest with you, other than for this assignment. The references I used, I located an animation video on YouTube, but unfortunately the areas that we're supposed to look at for this assignment, that animation video really didn't show them very well, so I elected not to use it. I did find in the Kel-Tec PF9 manual, operator's manual, it does have a illustrated parts breakdown, or what in the gun world they call a schematic, which is a head scratcher to an old electronics guy. But it met the needs as far as identifying the parts and how they go together. It's also great in that it actually explains, the functioning of the firearm, and the way it goes through the cycle of operation, which I was very surprised to see that. It's kind of neat. I'm curious if my other Kel-Tec firearms manuals does the same thing. I'll have to check. In part one, we're asked to identify the following failures and articulate why you feel they may fail in this particular firearm design. And those are the failure to lock, failure to unlock, and failure to feed. So starting with the failure to feed, obviously, not unlike most other semi-automatic handguns or magazine-fed handguns, one thing that could be an issue is if the magazine catch in the magazine itself, magazine body, becomes worn or damaged. It may over-insert the magazine or under-insert the magazine. It could cause feeding issues. Another thing is if the follower is damaged or anything like that, feed lips, magazine body damaged, all those things could contribute to failure to feed issues, as well as could the feed ramp on the barrel. And in this particular, for the PF9, the feed ramp's actually very narrow, and there's no side beveling on the barrel like there are on, say, a 1911. And last but not least, for feeding, a worn or damaged recoil spring could also cause feeding issues. As for what could cause a failure to lock in this particular firearm design, obviously one thing could be a worn or damaged recoil spring. If it was weak, it may not provide enough force to the slide going forward to lock up the barrel. The other thing is the top of the barrel here is cut out to lock into the slide. So if any of those surfaces became damaged or anything like that, they may prevent it from locking up as well. And in addition, the barrel, these lugs on the bottom of the barrel actually follow the assembly pin. That's what they call this. And that's what cams the barrel up and down in the cycling. So if this assembly pin became damaged or in any way, that could result in issues with locking. And the same way with these lugs. If the lugs were excessively worn or damaged, they may cause issues with locking or out of tolerances. Maybe if you're trying to fit a new barrel in, you may have to do some work with the lugs to get it to lock correctly. As far as unlocking, pretty much the same thing. The recoil spring isn't really in play there. Perhaps ammo could be if you had really weak ammo, but I can't envision ammo being so weak that it wouldn't unlock. It may not cycle properly, but you're still going to be looking at potential barrel issues with the lugs here. If they're damaged, it may prevent the barrel from dropping down low enough to unlock from the slide. And the same thing if your uh, assembly pin was damaged. Again, it may not allow the barrel to drop down as it should, and that could cause issues with unlocking. Before I move on to part 2 and 3, there's one thing I failed to mention in regards to potential failure to feed, and it's not unique to this platform by any stretch. And again, we have no live ammunition. We have a visual and physical check of the firearm, and the magazine is empty. We're not going to insert the magazine. So one operator error that can cause failure to feed or failure to lock, for that matter, is for inexperienced users when they insert a magazine in the firearm. We're not going to do it just because I don't have any dummy rounds with me, but we insert a magazine, and they have a tendency, instead of just racking the slide and letting it go, slingshotting it, so to speak, as like people like to say, they have a tendency to ride the slide forward a little bit, and that bleeds off a lot of the energy of the recoil spring and the mass of the slide moving forward, and that can and often does cause issues with the feeding or failure to lock, or going into battery. So now that said, that completes that part 1. Now for part 2, I'm asked to evaluate my understanding for my instructor, and was my assessment superficial, or did I dig deep, trying to understand the workings, and I already discussed the resources I relied on. Pretty much this and prior knowledge obtained through not just this course, but other courses, to include the 1911 capstone for SDI did. A lot of it transitions over. But I think my knowledge is pretty solid in the topics we're discussing here for this assignment. I don't believe it's superficial. I didn't have to dig really deep, frankly. The potential failures we're talking about are some of the easier ones to diagnose, I think, based on my limited experience anyway. So that's part 2. And for part 3, describe for your instructor what you can do in the future to develop a deeper understanding of these concepts. Continued education, exposure through hands-on, is going to be probably the biggest one at this point, because I think education-wise, as far as more research for these particular issues, for this particular design, I don't think I can get any more out of a book or a video, but it's just going to be dealing with potential corrective actions for failures down the road, and building my experience base.